Hey everybody, Topher Burns here, one-third of the partnership team at Territorial with another episode of Strange Coordinates, the show where we use brands as roadmaps to arrive at surprising places. Now today we're doing something a little bit different. As you can probably hear, we are on set right now with a new client of ours, Zesty Paws. They are a wonderful pet supplement brand. We are in the midst of doing some really awesome work with them, and we can't wait to share it with you. I know you're going to love it. Now, on Stranger Coordinates, we usually interview one person, but we actually have two whole teams together in one place, so we thought, why limit ourselves? A shoot is a really wonderful place to talk about the idea of creative decision making. When you have a single artist, the creative process is internal, one person deciding what they want to do, and then they do it. But when you're making ads, it's dozens, if not hundreds of people that get involved in one way or another. And so we wanted to explore that to give you a sense of what the process looks like and how different people navigate it. So what I've done is I've pulled together 3 questions. I am going to pull people aside and ask them those questions, and then we will stitch together some of our favorite answers from both the Zesty Paws team and from the Territorial team. So without further ado, let's dive into the fray. What's something you personally find to be challenging about making creative decisions?
I'll say one thing I genuinely find challenging is knowing when to stop refining and just trust the work. There's so many different ways that you can say something, but it really comes down to being honest instead of trying to be perfect.
In the context of creative work, what does that mean for you?
It's about coming down to the true feeling of it and trying to connect with your audience versus trying to sell something or be so pushy in an idea. This is more about an emotional connection.
What's something you personally find to be challenging about making creative decisions?
Well, I come from a very analytic job role, so I'm typically making decisions based off of evidence and data, which typically is numbers or verbal information or written information. So creative decisions really push me to consider more than the typical universe that I look at. It's not A and B, it's maybe A minus, B plus. There are places in the gray in between.
Can you describe what that felt like maybe when you stepped into a space that was more creative and where that pushed you? How did you feel and how you feel now about it?
I think at the beginning it was really disorienting and it was almost felt like decision paralysis. I was like, how do you find the decision? Because it is so much more about the journey than it is about the answer, which was a very different way for me to think. I think now I've become more comfortable with it, and I've also tried to find ways to make it work with the way that my brain thinks. So for example, you as my colleague we start on the same page, we end on the same page, but the journey that we take to get there is a little bit different. So I've been trying to absorb from our teams, our clients, the people we work with, so that I can better understand the creative process. And I think it's making me smarter and it's expanding my own brain.
What's something you personally find to be challenging about making creative decisions?
One thing that is challenging is to know when to stop the tweaking and perfecting the assets, right? What is the balance of how much more time am I going to spend trying to make it perfect versus the real impact that extra work is going to have in the market?
How do you make that decision?
Sometimes it's a gut check, right? Or it might be driven also by the urgency on the need, and is this relevant for a specific season where timing is going to be more of the essence, or can I actually wait a little bit more without losing that relevant time frame?
Do you like having deadlines or do you resist having deadlines?
I love having deadlines. I love to have a checklist, and I drive towards deliverables very well. That keeps my priorities very clear.
What's something you personally find to be challenging about making creative decisions?
I personally find prioritizing the push and pull of like making things possible, but also not over-promising, very challenging.
How does that come to life in your role?
I think we talk every day about new ideas and what could happen, and we're really eager to solve kind of really tricky little moments, and that gets kind of like opposed to, I don't know, some shoot production logistics and costs and timelines, and those two things together, I think finding the middle ground is a little bit of a hard thing sometimes.
Sometimes we live in a finite world. Sometimes we live in a world of abundance.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
What's something you personally find to be challenging about making creative decisions?
I think it's in the moment to balance the need to be fast and to have freedom, but also to allow the space for collaboration and cooperation amongst all the various people who are involved.
How do you navigate that?
I think it's just remembering that, like, if you look around a set, you see 50 people who you haven't had a direct conversation with, all of whom are already contributing to what you're doing. And knowing that you couldn't do anything without them. And so just knowing that there's other people whose input you need as well, and just keeping that in mind and realizing this whole thing is a cake we're baking together.
You mentioned the struggle between time and perfection. I'm wondering if you want to share a little bit of like how you make those trade-offs, because that seems difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge. You don't want to leave a set and then think, well, if we had just taken one more take, we might have had it, when we get into the edit room. I think the other thing to trust, and it's kind of connected to the previous point, which is that coming out of this, there's a whole other group of people who are going to make contributions and decisions that are going to shape the work in ways that I can't anticipate, that are going to be better than maybe I would have anticipated. And so, it's about making the best choices that that we can leave here with what we think is the strongest creative, but also feeling confident and having faith that there's people who are going to make great work out of a thing that maybe I didn't even recognize was a gem.
And those people are?
Like editors, sound designers, people who are working on color correct. There's lots of different ways in which the final product just gets shaped and appears even more glorious than we think it is here, and it looks pretty great here.
What's something you find personally to be challenging about making creative decisions?
I find that one of the challenging things isn't anything internal. It's thinking about the external implications of any creative decision, people's time, money, asking people to do things that maybe you're not 100% sure about. But I think it's important to be 100% sure on the outside and give people confidence that it's the right decision. I think that's all.
So when you're talking about people, do you mean the people on your team, the clients? When you're talking about making people comfortable, tell me more about who you're thinking about there.
Mostly, I think the people working, the vendors, whether that's animators or people on set, the people that will actually have to put the labor in. I think the maker side of things probably affects me more than anything. I also think that really good creative decisions are sometimes laborsome in general. They usually require more work, more iteration, just asking for what you think it needs in general when I was younger was really, really hard, and it's something that I've gotten better at. But usually there's just a lot of actual work implications when you are making a good creative decision.
What helped you get better at it?
Probably just seeing the outcome over and over again, and also understanding that usually people do want to do the best version, and at the end they're happy too, and sometimes people are grumpy in the process, but if you can keep people excited through it, and you get to see what those little tweaks and versions here and there and how the outcome can be better, then I think it just continues to you see the outcome over and over again, and it validates those pushes.
Tell us one thing you learned about creativity from someone you collaborated with.
I think that there's not always one like perfect idea from the beginning. More so, again, going back to framing it in an insight and then making the space in the room for more ideas to come together. Like it's just creating that space and asking questions instead of trying to solve it or saying this is the idea. I've seen that just through the years. Always makes for the best like creative to kind of be more of a fluid process and come out the strongest at the end.
Is there anyone specific who you've seen or worked with in the past who taught you that lesson? And can you remember a time when maybe that you learned that?
That's a good question. I think, okay, I'll share a little story. This was earlier in my career, and I worked with this very high-end fashion agency out of New York. And I mean, they were just good stuff. And they were working on soda because they wanted to do more diversity in their portfolio. And we had an idea, and I was trying to stay so true to the idea itself. And I remember I actually got yelled at. His name was Hans. He was fabulous. And he was like, I know that was the idea, but we have come so far from that. And like, you know, we're building on it here. And it was just a moment. I don't remember exactly all of it, but it was a moment for me where it was very humbling in that it's like, yes, you have to have an idea, but don't stay so true to it. As long as you're going back to that insight and you're making room for it to grow and build, like it can become something so much better. So don't fall in love with exactly what you think from the beginning.
Tell us one thing you learned about creativity from someone you collaborated with.
One thing I learned about creativity from someone I've collaborated with is that the best moments that are captured are usually unexpected and slightly unplanned. You can plan for almost everything, but if you leave a little bit of room for play and space versus jamming a bunch of stuff in, you are going to get better content.
Tell us one thing you learned about creativity from someone you collaborated with.
One comment that stuck to me is really that right when you share feedback with a creative person, don't tell them what you're trying to do. Share with them what you're trying to achieve, whether it's the feeling, and very often I love how it could be a sound. It doesn't really need language. It's a reaction, whether it's body or sound, that's the reaction you want to get from them. And I think learning to not be prescriptive, but articulate the problem and therefore what you're trying to have the professional creative solve for you.
Do you remember who you learned that from?
I think one is the naming the objective versus the ways to get there is actually from a research partner in my first job in CBG. I think our research VP at the time, Courtney, really helped train the entire organization to think that way. Don't tell me you need a consumer focus group. Tell me what you're trying to achieve. And in terms of the audible cues or body language, I learned that from, Yagi from my Twitter days. So the creative there.
Tell us one thing you learned about creativity from someone you collaborated with.
I think because of our industry, I have always really been obsessed with the why. So every creative decision having a why. And I think that is really important. But over the last couple of years, I have this friend, Alexi Pappas, and she's a director, runner kind of personality. And her process is a lot more loose. And sometimes she throws in things that don't necessarily have a specific why. I think it comes from somewhere, but not as linear as kind of our job sometimes forces us to do. And I think I've taken from our experiences to just try and have the process be a little looser here and there, and sometimes that creates magical little things.
What are, when you say magical little things, what do you think that looser process helps you to do?
I think it just allows more individuality and things that you haven't seen before, or a color that doesn't quite make sense but makes it feel like something new. Sometimes more humanness too, which I think in this day and age is nice when you can kind of see those kind of happy accidents or things that just feel like a human made something.
Tell us one thing you learned about creativity from someone you collaborated with.
I think something that stuck to me is that creativity is not tied up to having the most resources, the biggest budgets, or even the most time. Sometimes creativity, having boundaries and restrictions and constraints, can drive more creativity because you have to find solves that you may not have to be pushed for if you had all the resources available.
Is there any one specific or a project specifically that you remember where you learned this lesson?
God, a very old one from back in my early days working in South America. We had a lot of government restrictions, and the creativity came in terms of we had currency exchange control in place, and sourcing things locally was really hard, time consuming, and there were restrictions of sourcing stuff from other countries, and crazy enough, moving stuff from Argentina into Colombia to then bring it into Venezuela was cheaper and faster than doing it in Venezuela. And we kind of circumvent some of those restrictions that we have. So creative solution for some displays that we were working at the time.
What's something you only started noticing about ads once you had made one?
I think it's really the amazing teamwork and meticulous attention to detail. It really takes a whole village to come together. So I think I love collaboration, camaraderie. For me, that is, I see the invisible cues and people behind it when I look at something on the screen.
What's something you only started noticing about ads once you had made one?
This is a fun one. I actually think mostly camera angles and lighting is just not something that I was really exposed to outside of school picture day and everybody talking about selfie cameras and like ring lights. And now that I've actually been on several shoots, the amount of lighting and setup and shot setup and how people are blocking it out, all of the work that happens, shooting boards, all of the things that happen in the weeks leading up to the actual shot itself is infinitely more than as a consumer you actually think exists. And this is both for photo and video, and that just kind of blew my eyes open.
Is there anything that you can remember? Is there anything that's really stood out to you in your recent work where you've started to notice either the lighting as we're making it or lighting and other things that now you're seeing?
Yeah, we were doing some test and setup for some product shots on one of our shoots, and we were talking about the lighting being too hot, and I didn't have the right vocabulary word to describe what I was seeing, but in my head I was like, something looks a little off, like it looks a little washed out. And then over the course of the process and you know, helping the people in the shot, I learned that it means that the lights are too hot.
What's something you only started noticing about ads once you had made one?
I noticed that my parents, when I was a copywriter, I noticed that my parents would mute the ads. And I said, this is literally the only part of the ad that I contribute to. So if you could just not mute the ads, I'd be really, really happy. But beyond that, I think translating a general awareness of kind of film craft as a viewer into how you make that was a journey for me. And so taking those little, moments of anxiety when you're watching a spot and you're like, I think something's off with this framing, and then getting into the shoot and realizing we can make adjustments, we can tweak that. There's light adjustments we can make. And so understanding just how much goes into that composition, I think, was something that only happened once I was actually behind the monitor.
What's something you only started noticing about ads once you'd made one?
It comes down to a hierarchy of information. You only have about 3 seconds to capture somebody's attention. And so you don't want to get lost in all of the voices. If you have a room with 37 people in it and they're all screaming, you're not going to hear a single voice. So if you try to keep it down to one main idea and stick with it, that's going to be the one that connects with everybody.
Love that. What's something you only started noticing about ads once you had made one?
Probably the sheer detail that goes into like one scene, right? I mean, I have so much appreciation when I see a spot and I actually lose myself in the moment, but can also like pause it and like look at it and I'm like, there was so much thought that went into this, like down to every single detail of who lives in this space, who is this person, and I never really like would kind of appreciate that. And I think I have grown to really, really appreciate that when I see that in an ad. Also, I notice I get very kind of geeky and excited when I'm like, what legal team approved that? Like when I hear lines, I'm like, how'd they get that through their legal team? Or just little things like that I sort of pay more attention to.
All right, and with that, I will let my teammates get back to the literal herding of cats and dogs that they are doing in order to make these spots happen. You've been listening to Strange Coordinates, the show where we use brands as roadmaps to arrive at surprising places. If you are curious to see the work that we're working on, the actual advertisements that we're going to make from all of this stuff, you should subscribe to our newsletter. Go to weareterritorial.com, click the subscribe button. The Zesty Paws work is coming very soon, and I know you'll love it. And I think we'll close with, satisfying your curiosity. I'm sure you were wondering who you were hearing when you were listening to those beautiful insights and experiences. So we'll go out on hearing them introduce themselves. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.
I'm Aidan Sarakaya. I am a partner of business strategy at Territorial.
Hi, I'm Claudia Hartel. I work for H&H. I'm the Senior Marketing Director for Zesty Paws and Solid Gold.
Jen Boland, and I'm the Associate Creative Director for H&H.
I'm Julie Sullivan. I'm with Territorial, and I'm the Executive Producer.
I'm Lori Ball. I'm with Zesty Paws, and I'm the Senior Director of Growth Marketing.
Hi, I'm Miranda. I'm with the Zesty Paws team. I lead our marketing.
It's Robert Baylog. I'm co-founder and creative lead at Territorial and here at the Zesty Paws shoot.
Samantha Perry. I'm a creative director, art director by trade.